The USS Constellation cut through the choppy waters of the Mediterranean Sea like a knife through steel. Below deck, in the weapons bay, Petty Officer Second Class, Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she inspected the massive Tomahawk cruise missiles lined up in their launching tubes. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the gray metal surfaces, making everything look cold and unforgiving. Maria had been assigned to the missile loading crew just 3 weeks ago, and already the other sailors were whispering about her. Not because she couldn't do the job, she was actually one of the fastest loaders they'd ever seen. The whispers came because she was a woman in what most considered a man's job, and because she kept to herself more than anyone else on the ship. "Santos, check tube 7 again," barked Chief Petty Officer Williams, a thick-set man with arms like tree trunks who'd been loading weapons for 15 years. "Admiral's coming down for inspection in an hour, and I want everything perfect." Maria nodded silently and walked over to the 7th tube. The Tomahawk missile inside was a thing of deadly beauty, 20 feet long, weighing over 3,000 pounds, capable of hitting targets over 1,000 miles away with pinpoint accuracy. She ran her hands along the missile's surface, checking every connection, every seal, every electronic component. The other sailors watched her work with a mixture of respect and curiosity. There was something different about the way she handled the weapons, like she understood them on a level that went beyond training manuals and safety procedures. Her movements were precise, almost reverent, as if each missile was a sacred object that deserved her complete attention. "Where'd you learn to work like that?" asked Seaman Rodriguez, a young man from Texas who joined the Navy straight out of high school. "I've been doing this for 8 months, and I still feel like I'm going to break something." Maria glanced at him briefly, her dark eyes unreadable. "Practice," she said simply, then went back to her inspection. The truth was much more complicated than that single word could convey. Maria had learned to handle weapons in places where making a mistake meant death, not just for herself, but for the people she was trying to protect. But those were memories she kept locked away, buried so deep that sometimes she could almost pretend they belonged to someone else. Chief Williams walked over, his heavy boots echoing in the metal corridor. "You're thorough, Santos, I'll give you that, but you're also slow. Speed matters when we're in combat situation." "I'd rather be right than fast, Chief," Maria replied, not looking up from her work. Williams frowned. Most sailors would have apologized or made excuses, but Santos just stated her position like it was a fact of nature. There was something about her that reminded him of combat veterans he'd known, the ones who'd seen real action and came back changed. But Santos was only 24, and her service record showed she'd never been deployed to a combat zone. The weapons bay was a maze of steel and technology, filled with the quiet hum of ventilation systems and the occasional beep from monitoring equipment. Each missile tube was clearly marked with numbers and warning labels in multiple languages. The smell of gun oil and metal cleaner hung in the air like incense in a mechanical church. Maria moved from missile to missile with practiced efficiency, her small hands surprisingly strong as she checked mounting brackets and guidance systems. She'd always been good with her hands, even as a child growing up in East Lowe's Angels. Her father had been a mechanic, and he'd taught her that every machine had its own personality, its own way of speaking to those who knew how to listen. But the skills that made her so good at this job hadn't come from her father's garage. They'd come from a place much darker, much more dangerous than anything the Navy had prepared her for. "Santos," called out Petty Officer First Class Johnson, a tall African-American man who served as the weapons bay supervisor. "Admiral's on his way down. Make sure your uniform's squared away." Maria looked down at herself. Her Navy working uniform was immaculate, not a wrinkle or stain anywhere. She'd learned long ago that attention to detail could mean the difference between life and death, and that lesson had stuck with her even in peacetime. The other sailors began moving with renewed urgency, double-checking their work and straightening their uniforms. Admiral Richardson was known for his surprise inspections and his eagle eye for imperfection. He'd served in 3 wars and had the reputation for being fair but absolutely demanding when it came to standards. Maria felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she'd had before missions in Afghanistan, when everything had to be perfect because people's lives depended on it. She pushed the feeling down, focusing instead on the solid weight of the wrench in her hand and the cool metal of the missile tube. The sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor above, growing louder as they approached the weapons bay. Chief Williams positioned himself near the entrance, his posture military straight. The other sailors fell into formation, their movements sharp and precise. "Attention on deck," Williams shouted as Admiral Richardson entered the weapons bay. The Admiral was a compact man in his 50s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His dress uniform was perfect, every ribbon and medal in its exact place. Behind him walked his aide, a young lieutenant with a tablet computer who took notes on everything the Admiral observed. "As you were," the Admiral said, and the sailors relaxed slightly, though they remained alert and ready. Admiral Richardson began his inspection at the first missile tube, asking detailed questions about loading procedures, safety protocols, and maintenance schedules. His questions were precise and technical, designed to test not just knowledge but understanding. Maria watched him move through the bay, nodding the way he examined each missile with the same intensity she brought to her own work. This was a man who understood that weapons were tools of life and death, not just pieces of equipment to be maintained and stored. When he reached her station, Maria felt her heart rate increase slightly. She'd dealt with high-ranking officers before, but something about Admiral Richardson reminded her of Colonel Martinez, the man who'd saved her life in a dusty Afghan village 3 years ago. "Petty Officer Santos," the Admiral said, reading her name tape. "How long have you been working with Tomahawks?" 3 weeks aboard the Constellation, sir, but I trained on them for 6 months before assignment." The Admiral nodded, then began examining the missile in Tube 7 with the same thoroughness she'd shown earlier. His questions came rapid fire: guidance system specifications, explosive yield, range capabilities, failure modes. Maria answered each question without hesitation, her responses crisp and professional. But as she reached up to point out a particular component, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing the edge of what looked like a scar on her forearm. The Admiral's eyes caught the movement, and for just a moment his professional mask slipped. There was something in his expression, recognition, perhaps, or surprise. But the moment passed quickly, and he continued with his inspection. "Your work is exemplary, Petty Officer," he said finally. "Chief Williams, your crew reflects well on this ship." As the Admiral prepared to move on to the next section, Maria felt a strange sense of relief mixed with apprehension. She'd passed the inspection, but something in the Admiral's eyes told her this wouldn't be their last encounter. The weapons bay returned to its normal rhythm after the Admiral left. The other sailors relaxed, joking about the intensity of the inspection and congratulating each other on their performance. But Maria remained focused on her work, methodically checking and rechecking each missile system. She'd learned long ago that the real test wasn't in the inspection. It was in the moments when no one was watching, when you had to maintain standards because lives depended on it, not because someone important was looking over your shoulder. As the day shift ended and the evening crew prepared to take over, Maria gathered her tools and prepared to head to her quarters. The USS Constellation would continue its patrol through the Mediterranean, carrying its deadly cargo of Tomahawk missiles toward whatever mission awaited them. She walked through the corridors of the ship, past sailors heading to evening chow or settling in for the night watch. The Constellation was a city at sea, home to nearly 6,000 people who worked together to project American power across the world's oceans. In her small quarters, Maria sat on her narrow bunk and removed her work shirt. In the privacy of her own space, the scars on her arms and back were clearly visible, thin white lines that crisscrossed her skin like a map of violence and survival. Each scar told a story she'd never shared with anyone in the Navy. Stories of a different kind of service, in a different kind of war, where the enemy didn't wear uniforms and the rules of engagement changed with every sunrise. Tomorrow would bring another day of loading missiles, another opportunity to prove herself worthy of the trust placed in her. But tonight, alone with her memories, Maria Santos allowed herself to remember the girl she'd been before the scars, before the fear, before she'd learned that sometimes the only way to protect others was to put yourself in harm's way. The USS Constellation continued its voyage through the dark Mediterranean waters, carrying its crew and its secrets toward an uncertain future. 3 days after the Admiral's inspection, Maria Santos was working the night shift in the weapons bay when the ship's general alarm suddenly pierced the quiet routine. Red lights flashed throughout the compartment as the announcement crackled over the ship's communication system. General quarters, general quarters. All hands man your battle stations. This is not a drill. The weapons bay exploded into controlled chaos. Sailors who moments before had been casually maintaining equipment suddenly moved with urgent precision. Maria felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with real danger, a feeling she knew better than most people twice her age. Chief Williams came running into the bay, his face grim. "Listen up, people. We've got a situation developing off the coast of Syria. Intelligence reports indicate terrorist cells have taken control of a chemical weapons facility. We may be ordered to launch Tomahawks within the hour." The reality of their mission suddenly became crystal clear. These weren't training exercises or routine maintenance. The missiles they'd been caring for might soon be racing across hundreds of miles to prevent a catastrophe that could kill thousands of innocent people. "Santos, Rodriguez, Johnson, I need you on tubes 1 through 6, Williams ordered. "We're going to do a complete systems check on our primary launch sequence. Every connection, every circuit, every safety system needs to be perfect." Maria moved to her assigned position with practiced calm, but inside, her mind was racing. The last time she'd been involved in preventing a chemical weapons attack had been in Afghanistan, when intelligence had indicated that Taliban forces had acquired Syrian-made sarin gas. That mission had gone wrong in ways that still haunted her dreams. As she worked, checking each Tomahawk missile with meticulous care, Maria became aware that Admiral Richardson had entered the weapons bay. Unlike his previous inspection, this visit wasn't announced. The Admiral moved quietly through the space, observing his crew as they prepared for potential combat. The tension in the air was palpable. These sailors had trained for this moment, but training was different from the real thing. Lives hung in the balance, not just American lives, but the lives of Syrian civilians who had no idea that their fate might depend on the precise work being done in this steel chamber beneath the Mediterranean Sea. "How long since your last combat launch?" the Admiral asked Chief Williams. 6 months, sir. We fired 8 Tomahawks at ISIS positions in Iraq. Perfect performance, all targets destroyed. Admiral Richardson nodded, then walked over to where Maria was working on Tube 3. She was completely focused on her task, running her hands along the missile's guidance system with the kind of intense concentration usually reserved for defusing bombs. "Petty Officer Santos," the Admiral said quietly, so only she could hear. "You handle these weapons like someone who's seen them used in combat." Maria's hands never stopped moving, but the Admiral noticed the slight tensing of her shoulders. "I take my responsibilities seriously, sir." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." For a moment, Maria's hands did stop moving. She looked up at the Admiral, and in her eyes, he saw something he'd seen in the eyes of his most experienced combat veterans. The look of someone who'd faced death and made peace with it. "Sir, Attention in the bay," Chief Williams called out. "We have authorization to prepare for launch, all systems to full operational status. This is the real thing, people." The moment between Maria and the Admiral was broken as the weapons bay shifted into full combat preparation mode. Additional personnel flooded in to assist with the launch preparation. The air filled with the sound of electronic systems coming online and the urgent conversations of sailors coordinating complex procedures. Maria threw herself into her work with renewed intensity. Each Tomahawk missile had to be perfect, guidance systems calibrated, fuel levels checked, warheads armed, communication links verified. A single malfunction could mean mission failure, and mission failure could mean thousands of dead civilians. As she worked, memories tried to push their way into her consciousness. The weight of an M4 rifle in her hands, the smell of cordite and fear, the face of a little girl in an Afghan village who'd looked at her with absolute trust, believing that the American soldier would keep her safe. "Santos," Chief Williams called out, "Tube 3 is showing a guidance system anomaly. I need you to run a full diagnostic." Maria immediately accessed the missile's computer system, her fingers flying across the diagnostic panel. The problem was subtle, a minor calibration error that most technicians might miss, but which could cause the missile to miss its target by several hundred yards. "Found it, Chief. Gyroscope drift in the inertial navigation system. Give me 10 minutes to recalibrate." "You've got 5 minutes. We may get launch orders any second." Admiral Richardson watched as Maria worked with surgical precision, making adjustments that required both technical knowledge and intuitive understanding of the weapon system. Her movements were economical, purposeful, without wasted motion or hesitation. "Where did you learn to work like that?" the Admiral asked. Maria didn't look up from her work. "You pick things up, sir." "Not like that, you don't. I've been around weapons my entire career, petty officer. What you're doing requires experience under pressure, combat experience." The diagnostic panel beeped as Maria completed the calibration. The guidance system was now perfect, ready to deliver its deadly payload with surgical precision. She ran a final systems check, then stepped back. "Tube 3 ready for launch, Chief." Williams checked his status board. All 6 primary missiles were now fully operational. Whatever was going to happen next, the USS Constellation was ready. The ship's intercom crackled to life. "All stations, this is the captain. We have received targeting data for a time-critical strike. Terrorist forces have begun moving chemical weapons out of the facility. We have authorization to launch. Weapons control, prepare for immediate engagement." The weapons bay fell into the kind of focused silence that comes before action. Every sailor knew their job, every system had been checked and double-checked. Now it was a matter of waiting for the final order. Admiral Richardson positioned himself where he could observe the entire operation. His eyes kept returning to Petty Officer Santos, who stood ready at her station with the kind of calm alertness he'd only seen in veterans of sustained combat. "Launch authorization received," came the captain's voice. "Firing sequence initiated. Tube 1 fire." The first Tomahawk missile erupted from its launcher with a roar that shook the entire ship. The sound was like controlled thunder, a reminder of the awesome power contained within these weapons. "Tube 2 fire." Another roar, another missile racing toward its target at nearly 500 miles per hour. Each Tomahawk carried 1,000 pounds of high explosive, guided by the most sophisticated targeting systems ever created. "Tube 3 fire." Maria's missile, the one she'd just repaired, launched perfectly. She watched the status display as it confirmed proper separation, guidance system activation, and target acquisition. In approximately 45 minutes, that missile would strike the chemical weapons facility with devastating precision. As the remaining missiles launched in sequence, Maria felt a familiar mixture of professional satisfaction and moral weight. These weapons would prevent a humanitarian catastrophe, but they were still instruments of death and destruction. When the last missile had cleared its tube, the weapons bay fell quiet except for the hum of ventilation systems and the distant sound of the ship's engines. The crew began the process of reloading, preparing for potential follow-up strikes. Admiral Richardson approached Maria as she started the post-launch inspection of Tube 3. "Perfect launch, petty officer. Your calibration work may have saved civilian lives." "Just doing my job, sir." "No," the Admiral said firmly. "What you did was exceptional work under pressure, the kind of work that comes from experience most people your age don't have." Maria finally looked directly at him. "What are you saying, sir?" "I'm saying that I've been in the military for 32 years. I know a combat veteran when I see one. The question is, what's a combat veteran doing with a service record that shows no combat deployments?" Before Maria could respond, Chief Williams called out, "Santos, I need you to start the reload sequence on Tube 3. We may have more targets coming in." As Maria walked away to continue her duties, Admiral Richardson watched her with growing curiosity. There was a story here, something that didn't match the official records. And after 32 years of military service, he'd learned to trust his instincts when something didn't add up. The night shift continued with methodical efficiency. New Tomahawks were loaded into the tubes that had just fired, weapons systems were recalibrated, and the crew prepared for whatever orders might come next. But in the back of his mind, Admiral Richardson kept thinking about the way Petty Officer Santos had handled that guidance system malfunction. It wasn't just technical competence. It was the kind of calm expertise that came from knowing that lives depended on getting it right. As the USS Constellation continued its patrol through Mediterranean waters, carrying news that their missiles had successfully destroyed the chemical weapons facility, Admiral Richardson made a mental note to look deeper into Maria Santos's background. Some stories he'd learned were worth uncovering, and some people carried secrets that, once revealed, changed everything about how you understood them. The weapons bay returned to its normal rhythm, but the Admiral's questions lingered in the air like the smell of cordite after a firefight. Admiral Richardson spent the next morning in his quarters, staring at a computer screen that displayed Petty Officer Maria Santos's complete service record. On the surface, everything looked normal, exemplary training scores, commendations for technical proficiency, no disciplinary actions. But 32 years of military experience had taught him to read between the lines. The timing bothered him most. Santos had enlisted in the Navy 3 years ago, shortly after her 20th birthday, but there was a gap in her background, nearly 2 years when she seemed to have dropped off the grid entirely. No employment records, no college enrollment, no traceable activity of any kind. His aide, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, knocked on his door. "Sir, you asked me to research Petty Officer Santos's background. I found something interesting." "Come in, Sarah. What did you find?" Lieutenant Commander Mitchell set a classified folder on his desk. "Sir, there's no official record of this, but I have contacts at Army personnel. Maria Santos wasn't always Maria Santos." Admiral Richardson raised an eyebrow. "Explain." 3 years ago, she was Maria Elena Vasquez, Army specialist with the 75th Ranger Regiment. According to my contact, she was embedded with Special Operations Forces in Afghanistan for 18 months. The Admiral felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. The 75th Rangers didn't take just anyone, and embedding with Special Operations meant she'd seen action that most soldiers never experienced. What happened to end her Army career? That's where it gets complicated, sir. Her records are sealed, classified at levels that require special authorization to access. But my contact mentioned something about a mission that went wrong, civilian casualties, and a medical discharge for psychological trauma. Admiral Richardson studied the folder, noting the security classifications and redacted sections. Whatever Maria Santos, or Maria Vasquez, had experienced in Afghanistan, it had been significant enough to bury deep in classified files. "There's something else, sir," Lieutenant Commander Mitchell continued. "I pulled the duty roster for yesterday's Tomahawk launch. Santos worked on Tube 3, the missile that had the guidance system malfunction. According to Chief Williams's report, she diagnosed and corrected a problem that could have caused a complete mission failure. In 5 minutes under combat stress." "Yes, sir. And according to the technical analysis, the specific malfunction she corrected is extremely rare. Most technicians would need hours to identify it, and many wouldn't catch it at all." Admiral Richardson closed the folder and walked to his cabin's porthole, looking out at the endless expanse of Mediterranean water. Somewhere out there, Syrian civilians were alive because a young woman with hidden scars had made sure a missile flew true to its target. "Sarah, I want you to arrange a private meeting with Petty Officer Santos. Nothing official, just a conversation between senior officers and a member of our crew." "Sir, are you sure? If her records are classified." "I'm not interested in her classified records. I'm interested in making sure we have the full measure of the people serving under our command. Sometimes the most valuable assets are the ones hiding in plain sight." 2 hours later, Maria Santos stood outside Admiral Richardson's quarters, her dress blue uniform perfect in every detail. She'd been summoned for what her chief described as an informal interview with senior command staff. She knew it was about more than her technical performance. "Come in, Petty Officer Santos," the Admiral said when she knocked. "Please have a seat." His quarters were spacious by ship standards, with a desk, small conference table, and walls covered with photos from his long military career. Maria recognized some of the locations: Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, places where the line between right and wrong was measured in split-second decisions. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell was also present, her expression professional but not unfriendly. Maria had the sense this was more than a routine interview. "Relax, Santos," Admiral Richardson said, nodding her rigid posture. "You're not in trouble. In fact, yesterday's performance was exceptional. Chief Williams tells me you saved the mission with that guidance system repair." "Just doing my job, sir." "That's the second time you've said that to me. And both times, I've had the feeling you were describing something far beyond what anyone would consider just doing a job." Maria remained silent, her hands clasped in her lap. She'd learned long ago that sometimes the best response was no response at all. Admiral Richardson leaned back in his chair. I've been in the military longer than you've been alive, petty officer. I've served with the best, Rangers, SEALs, Force Recon Marines. What I saw yesterday was the kind of performance that comes from combat experience. Sir, my service record. Your service record shows 3 years in the Navy and excellent technical training. It doesn't show anything about how a 24-year-old sailor learned to work under pressure like a seasoned combat veteran. The silence stretched between them. Maria felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she'd had when Colonel Martinez had questioned her after the mission in Kandahar province. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell spoke up. Maria, we're not here to cause problems for you, but Admiral Richardson believes in knowing his people, all of his people, and sometimes that means understanding their full capabilities. With respect, sir, Maria said carefully, some things are better left in the past. Admiral Richardson nodded slowly. I understand that perspective. I also understand that sometimes the past has a way of becoming relevant to the present. He stood and walked to one of the photos on his wall, a group shot of soldiers in desert camouflage, taken somewhere dusty and dangerous. This was taken in Fallujah, 2005. Half the men in this picture didn't make it home, but the ones who did came back changed. They carried something with them, experience, perspective, skills that couldn't be taught in any training program. Maria looked at the photo and felt a familiar pang of recognition. She knew that look in the soldiers' eyes, had seen it in mirrors, and in the faces of others who'd been where bullets flew and decisions carried life-or-death consequences. The question I have, the Admiral continued, is whether we're making full use of the capabilities our people bring to this ship. Yesterday, you prevented a mission failure that could have had serious consequences, but you did it with skills that go beyond your official training. Sir, I'm qualified for my current position. You're overqualified for your current position. And in a military where we need every advantage we can get, that seems like something worth exploring. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell pulled out a tablet computer. The Navy has programs for people with specialized backgrounds, advanced training tracks, special assignments, opportunities to put unique skills to better use. Maria felt something shift inside her, a mixture of fear and possibility. She'd joined the Navy to escape her past, to find a place where she could serve without having to relive the worst moments of her life. But maybe running from the past wasn't the same as moving beyond it. What would you need to know? She asked quietly. Admiral Richardson returned to his seat. The truth, not classified details or operational specifics, just an honest conversation about who you are and what you've experienced. Maria took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 3 years of carefully maintained secrets. My name used to be Maria Elena Vasquez. I served with the 75th Ranger Regiment in Afghanistan. I was embedded with Special Operations Forces for 18 months. What kind of operations? Counterterrorism, mostly. Tracking down Taliban and ISIS cells, disrupting chemical weapons trafficking, protecting civilian populations in contested areas. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell made notes on her tablet. What ended your Army service? The question Maria had been dreading, the one that brought back memories of dust and blood and the sound of a little girl crying in a language she didn't understand. A mission went wrong. We had intelligence about a chemical weapons cache hidden in a village near Kandahar. When we arrived, the intel was bad, the weapons were there, but so were civilians. Families who had no idea they were living next to sarin gas canisters. Admiral Richardson leaned forward. What happened? Taliban forces attacked while we were trying to evacuate the civilians. During the firefight, one of the gas canisters was damaged. We had to make a choice, complete the mission and risk civilian casualties from gas exposure or abort, and let the weapons fall back into terrorist hands. The silence in the room was heavy with the weight of impossible decisions. We completed the mission, Maria continued, but not before 23 civilians were exposed to gas, most of them children. How many survived? Maria's voice was barely a whisper. 14. Admiral Richardson and Lieutenant Commander Mitchell exchanged glances. This was the kind of moral injury that destroyed some people and forged others into something harder and more determined. The Army medically discharged you for PTSD, the Admiral asked gently. Among other things, I spent 8 months in treatment, learning how to sleep without nightmares and function without jumping at every loud noise. When they offered me medical retirement, I took it. But you didn't retire from service entirely. You joined the Navy. I couldn't just be a civilian. Military service is. It's who I am. But I thought if I could do something technical, something removed from combat, maybe I could serve without having to make those kinds of choices again. Admiral Richardson studied her face, noting the strength it had taken to share this story. And yet, yesterday, you found yourself in a situation where your combat experience directly contributed to mission success. Yes, sir. How did that feel? Maria considered the question carefully. Like maybe running from the past isn't the same as healing from it. Like maybe the things I learned, the prices I paid, maybe they can still serve a purpose. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell looked up from her tablet. There are positions in naval special warfare that could use someone with your background. Technical specialties that would put your skills to work without requiring direct combat roles. What kind of positions? Admiral Richardson smiled for the first time during the conversation. The kind where 23 dead civilians become the reason you make sure missions succeed, not the reason you hide from responsibility. For the first time in 3 years, Maria Santos felt something she'd almost forgotten. The possibility that her past didn't have to be a burden to carry, but a foundation to build on. I'd like to know more about those positions, sir. I thought you might. Welcome back to the fight, Specialist Vasquez. 2 weeks after her conversation with Admiral Richardson, Maria found herself in a classified briefing room aboard the USS Constellation, surrounded by officers she'd never met before. The room was sterile and windowless, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that reflected off polished metal surfaces. Commander David Park, the ship's Special Operations liaison, stood at the front of the room with a presentation screen showing satellite images of what looked like an industrial complex. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a developing situation that requires immediate attention. Maria sat at the back of the room, still uncertain about her role in whatever was about to unfold. Admiral Richardson had been cryptic about the details, saying only that her unique perspective might be valuable for a time-sensitive mission. 48 hours ago, Commander Park continued, satellite reconnaissance identified suspicious activity at this pharmaceutical plant in Lebanon. Initial analysis suggested routine manufacturing operations, but closer examination reveals something far more concerning. The screen changed to show thermal imaging and spectroscopic data. To most observers, it would have looked like meaningless colored patterns, but Maria immediately recognized the signatures. Her stomach tightened as memories of Afghanistan came flooding back. The heat signatures and chemical emissions are consistent with large-scale production of binary chemical weapons, Park explained. Specifically, components that can be combined to create VX nerve agent. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, who is now serving as Maria's unofficial mentor, leaned forward. Intelligence estimates suggest production began approximately 6 weeks ago. If they continue at current rates, they'll have enough nerve agent to contaminate the water supply of Beirut within 10 days. Admiral Richardson entered the briefing room, his expression grim. The Lebanese government has requested our assistance, but the situation is complicated. The facility is located in a densely populated area, surrounded by residential neighborhoods and schools. Maria felt a chill of recognition. This was exactly the kind of scenario that had gone wrong in Afghanistan, chemical weapons hidden among civilian populations, with no clean military solution. Our mission, Admiral Richardson continued, is to develop a strike package that neutralizes the chemical weapons production while minimizing civilian casualties. We have authorization for Tomahawk strikes, but the targeting requirements are extremely precise. Commander Park activated a detailed architectural diagram of the pharmaceutical plant. The facility has 12 buildings spread across 40 acres. Only 3 buildings are involved in weapons production, but they're located in the center of the complex, surrounded by legitimate pharmaceutical operations and administrative offices. How many people work in the facility? Asked Commander Sarah Williams, the ship's weapons officer. Approximately 800 during day shifts, 300 at night. Most are civilian employees who have no idea what's happening in buildings 7, 8, and 9. Maria raised her hand tentatively. Sir, what's the timeline for production completion? Admiral Richardson looked at her with approval. Intelligence estimates 10 days, but that assumes continued operations. If they detect any threat, they could accelerate production or, worse, begin dispersal immediately. The gravity of the situation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. They were looking at a potential humanitarian catastrophe with no obvious solution. This is where Petty Officer Santos's experience becomes relevant, Admiral Richardson said. 3 years ago, she dealt with a similar situation in Afghanistan. I've asked her to provide input on our targeting options. Maria felt every eye in the room turn toward her. These were senior officers with decades of experience, and she was being asked to contribute to a decision that could affect thousands of lives. Sir, in Afghanistan, we faced a similar challenge with chemical weapons hidden in a civilian area. The key lesson we learned is that you can't just destroy the weapons, you have to prevent dispersal during the destruction process. Commander Park nodded. What does that mean in practical terms? It means timing is everything. VX nerve agent is stored as binary components, two chemicals that are relatively harmless until combined. If you hit the storage areas while the components are separated, you can neutralize them without creating a toxic cloud. Maria stood and walked to the presentation screen, pointing to specific buildings in the satellite imagery. Based on the heat signatures, it looks like Building 7 is the mixing facility, Building 8 is component storage, and Building 9 is packaging and shipping. If we hit Building 8 during a storage cycle, when the components are in separate tanks, the explosion would actually neutralize most of the chemical agents, Maria continued. But if we hit it during a mixing cycle, we could create exactly the kind of dispersal event we're trying to prevent. Admiral Richardson leaned forward with interest. How do we determine the timing of their production cycles? We need continuous surveillance to identify patterns. Chemical weapons production follows predictable schedules because of the safety requirements. Nobody works with VX components for more than a few hours at a time. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell was taking detailed notes. What about the other buildings? Building 7 needs to be hit immediately after Building 8, within 60 seconds. That prevents any remaining components from being combined in an emergency response. Building 9 can wait until after we confirm neutralization of the active agents. Commander Park studied the satellite images with renewed understanding. So we're looking at a precisely sequenced strike, not a simultaneous attack. Exactly, and we need real-time intelligence right up until the moment of launch. If their production schedule changes, our entire plan becomes worthless. Admiral Richardson smiled grimly. This is exactly the kind of complex targeting problem that conventional wisdom says can't be solved with Tomahawk strikes. Sir, Maria said carefully, with respect, conventional wisdom doesn't account for the fact that chemical weapons manufacturers are predictable. They have to be. One mistake in their production process kills everyone in the facility. Over the next 6 hours, the team worked to develop a comprehensive strike plan. Maria found herself at the center of the planning process, her knowledge of chemical weapons production cycles proving invaluable for timing calculations. The plan that emerged was elegant in its complexity. A sequence of 4 Tomahawk strikes, spaced between 30 seconds and 5 minutes apart, designed to neutralize the chemical weapons while minimizing the risk of toxic dispersal. But as the planning session continued, Maria became aware of a problem that went beyond technical considerations. Sir, there's something we need to discuss about post-strike assessment. What do you mean? Commander Park asked. After we hit the facility, someone needs to verify that the chemical agents were actually neutralized. Satellite imagery won't be enough. We need ground truth confirmation. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Verifying chemical weapons destruction required personnel with specialized training and equipment to enter what would essentially be a contaminated area. Admiral Richardson looked directly at Maria. You're volunteering for that mission, aren't you? Sir, I have the training and experience. And frankly, if this goes wrong, I'm the person best qualified to assess the situation and recommend follow-up actions. Absolutely not, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell said firmly. You're not even officially assigned to special operations. There's no way we can authorize. Actually, Admiral Richardson interrupted, there is a way. Temporary assignment to naval special warfare for the duration of this operation. Full authority to act as senior chemical weapons specialist. Maria felt her pulse quicken. This was what she'd been avoiding for 3 years, direct involvement in combat operations, where her decisions could mean life or death for civilian populations. But as she looked around the room at the faces of officers who were depending on her expertise, she realized that running from responsibility wasn't the same as learning from past mistakes. "Sir, I accept the assignment." Admiral Richardson stood, his expression serious but approving. "Outstanding. Commander Park, I want Petty Officer Santos fully briefed on extraction procedures and communication protocols. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, arrange for specialized equipment and protective gear." As the meeting broke up and officers filed out to begin mission preparations, Admiral Richardson approached Maria privately. "3 years ago, you were part of a mission that saved lives, but cost you more than you should have had to pay. Today, you're volunteering for another mission that could save thousands of lives. Sir, the people in that Lebanese neighborhood don't deserve to die because I'm afraid of making hard decisions. That's exactly why you're the right person for this job. Someone who's afraid of the consequences is someone who will make sure to get it right." As the USS Constellation adjusted course toward the Lebanese coast, Maria returned to her quarters to prepare for a mission that would take her back into the world she'd tried to leave behind. But this time, she wasn't running toward an uncertain fate with incomplete information and impossible choices. This time, she was going in prepared, with the tools and knowledge needed to succeed. The scars on her back were still there, and they always would be. But maybe, she thought as she prepared her equipment, those scars didn't have to define her future. Maybe they could guide it towards something better. The pre-dawn Mediterranean air was crisp and still as Maria stood on the flight deck of the USS Constellation, watching the horizon lighten over the Lebanese coast. In 6 hours, if everything went according to plan, Tomahawk missiles would streak across that same horizon toward their targets. She wore full chemical protective gear, a bulky suit that made movement awkward but would keep her alive if the mission went wrong. Her equipment pack contained detection devices, sampling tools, and communication gear that would allow her to provide real-time assessment of the strike results. Admiral Richardson approached, his own gear indicating he would be monitoring the operation from the ship's command center. "Final intelligence update, Specialist Vasquez," he said, using her former Army rank as recognition of her role in this mission. "Satellite surveillance confirms the facility is following their normal production schedule. Building 8 shows heat signatures consistent with component storage phase." Maria nodded, checking her watch. "That gives us a 4-hour window before they begin the next mixing cycle, plenty of time for strike and assessment." The Lebanese military has cleared the area around the facility. Civilian evacuation is complete within a 2-kilometer radius. If this works, we'll have neutralized a major chemical weapons threat without a single civilian casualty. The weight of that responsibility settled on Maria's shoulders like a familiar burden. 3 years ago in Afghanistan, she hadn't been able to prevent civilian casualties. Today, she had a chance to make sure that didn't happen again. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell joined them on the flight deck. "Maria, your insertion helicopter is ready. Marine Force Recon will provide security and transportation. Once you confirm the chemical agents are neutralized, they'll extract you immediately." "What if the agents aren't neutralized?" "Then you'll have to stay in the area long enough to guide follow-up strikes. The mission doesn't end until that facility is no longer a threat." Maria understood. If the first strike failed, she would be the eyes and ears for whatever came next, regardless of the personal risk. The helicopter that would carry her to the target was a sleek MH-60 Seahawk, modified for special operations with advanced communication equipment and defensive systems. The Marine crew was already conducting final pre-flight checks. Commander Park appeared with a tablet showing real-time satellite feeds of the target facility. Latest imagery shows normal activity patterns, no indication they suspect anything unusual. The Lebanese government has maintained complete operational security. As Maria climbed into the helicopter, Admiral Richardson grabbed her arm gently. "Vasquez, I want you to remember something. 3 years ago, you were a young soldier thrown into an impossible situation with inadequate information and support. Today, you're an experienced professional with the best intelligence, equipment, and backup the United States Navy can provide." "Sir, what if I make the wrong call again?" Then you'll make it based on complete information and careful analysis, not incomplete intelligence and time pressure. That's the difference between a tragic accident and professional judgment. The helicopter lifted off as the first Tomahawk missiles were being loaded into their launch tubes. Maria watched the USS Constellation fall away below her, becoming just another gray shape on the endless blue Mediterranean. The flight to the Lebanese coast took 45 minutes, during which Maria reviewed the strike timeline one final time. The precision required was extraordinary. Each missile had to hit its target within a 30-second window to prevent chemical dispersal. 2 minutes to target area, announced the Marine crew chief. Constellation reports missiles away, impact in 18 minutes. Through her headset, Maria could hear the voice of Admiral Richardson coordinating the strike from the ship's command center. Strike package is airborne, all missiles tracking normally. Target area is clear of civilian personnel. The helicopter took up position 2 kilometers from the pharmaceutical facility, close enough for Maria to reach the impact site quickly, but far enough away to avoid any potential chemical dispersal. Through powerful binoculars, she could see the complex of buildings that had been producing enough nerve agent to devastate Beirut. 10 minutes to impact, came Admiral Richardson's voice. All missiles maintaining nominal flight paths. Specialist Vasquez, report ready status. Ready for post-strike assessment, Maria replied. All detection equipment operational, chemical protective gear sealed and tested. The next 10 minutes felt like hours. Maria watched the facility through her binoculars, noting the normal morning activity as workers arrived for their shifts, completely unaware of what was about to happen. At exactly 8:47 local time, the first Tomahawk missile struck Building 8 with devastating precision. The explosion was enormous, sending a column of smoke and debris hundreds of feet into the air. But there was no telltale yellow-green cloud that would indicate nerve agent dispersal. 30 seconds later, the second missile hit Building 7, destroying the mixing facility in a fireball that could be seen for miles. Again, no indication of chemical agent release. The third and fourth missiles struck the administrative buildings that served as command and control for the weapons production operation, completing the destruction of the facility's ability to manufacture chemical weapons. Strike complete, Admiral Richardson announced. All missiles on target. Specialist Vasquez, you are cleared for assessment approach. The helicopter swooped in toward the burning remains of the facility. Even through her protective gear, Maria could smell the smoke and chemical residue from the explosions. But her detection equipment showed no traces of VX nerve agent in the air. Command, this is Vasquez. Initial assessment shows no nerve agent dispersal. The binary components appear to have been successfully neutralized by the explosions. Outstanding. Continue with detailed assessment. The helicopter landed in a cleared area 500 meters from the destroyed buildings. Maria disembarked with 2 Marine escorts, her equipment pack heavy on her shoulders as she approached what remained of the chemical weapons facility. Building 8 was completely destroyed, its concrete walls reduced to rubble. But the debris pattern told a story of success. The explosion had been powerful enough to incinerate the chemical components before they could combine into active nerve agent. Maria set up her detection equipment and began taking air and soil samples from around the impact site. Each sample confirmed what her initial readings had indicated. The chemical weapons had been destroyed rather than dispersed. Command, this is Vasquez. Detailed assessment confirms complete neutralization of chemical agents. No contamination detected. The facility is no longer a threat. Admiral Richardson's voice crackled through her headset and she could hear the relief. Copy that, Specialist. Mission accomplished. Return to extraction point. As Maria packed up her equipment and prepared to leave the site, she took a moment to look around at what they had accomplished. The facility that could have produced enough nerve agent to kill thousands of people was now nothing but smoking rubble. But more importantly, the residential neighborhoods surrounding the facility remained untouched. Families were safe in their homes, children would go to school without fear, and the water supply of Beirut remained secure. The helicopter ride back to the USS Constellation gave Maria time to reflect on how different this mission had felt from her experience in Afghanistan. This time, she'd had complete intelligence, proper equipment, adequate support, and most crucially, enough time to plan and execute a precise operation. As the ship came into view, Admiral Richardson's voice came through her headset one final time. Specialist Vasquez, on behalf of the Lebanese people, the United States Navy, and everyone who will never know how close they came to disaster, thank you. Back on the ship's flight deck, Maria was greeted by the crew of the weapons bay who had loaded and maintained the missiles that made the mission possible. Chief Williams stepped forward with a rare smile. Santos, I hear your targeting advice was spot on. Those missiles hit exactly where they needed to hit. We all did our jobs, Chief. That's what made it work. Admiral Richardson appeared as Maria was removing her chemical protective gear. Walk with me, Specialist. They strolled across the flight deck as the sun climbed higher over the Mediterranean. The operation was over, but Maria sensed this conversation would determine what came next. 3 years ago, you told me that military service is who you are, the Admiral said. Today proved that you're right, but more than that, it proved that your experiences, all of them, including the painful ones, make you uniquely valuable. Sir, what happens now? Now you have a choice. You can return to loading Tomahawks in the weapons bay, which you do exceptionally well. Or you can accept a permanent assignment to naval special warfare, where missions like today's would become your specialty. Maria looked out at the endless expanse of ocean, thinking about the path that had brought her here. The scars on her back would always be reminders of the price of failure, but today had shown her that those same scars could also be the foundation for success. Sir, I'd like to request assignment to naval special warfare. I thought you might. Welcome to your new career, Lieutenant Santos. Maria looked at him in surprise. Sir. Effective immediately, you're commissioned as a lieutenant in the United States Navy, with specialty designation in chemical, biological, and nuclear threat assessment. Congratulations, officer. As the USS Constellation continued its patrol through Mediterranean waters, Maria Santos stood on the flight deck in her new role, watching the horizon for whatever challenges lay ahead. The girl who had been broken by an impossible choice in Afghanistan was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned to turn painful experience into protective capability. The scars would always be there, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they had become the foundation for something stronger, the knowledge that the past didn't have to dictate the future, and that sometimes the greatest victories came from refusing to let tragedy have the final word. In the distance, Lebanese families were returning to their homes, never knowing how close they had come to disaster, and never knowing that their safety had been secured by someone who understood the terrible cost of failure and was determined never to pay it again.